All right, second graders, it's time for Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's Magic. Chapter 6, Part 3. We're going to find out what happens with Sharon, our little heedless breaker. Mrs. Rogers called Mr. Rogers right away to tell him what Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle had said. Mr. Rogers said, "Sounds fine, but if it doesn't work, I still think my methods should be tried." A good sound spanking would at least make Sharon careful about sitting down, he said callously. Mrs. Rogers said, mm-hmm. "Don't be late tonight, dear. We're having cheese souffle." That afternoon, in spite of the great precautions on Mrs. Rogers' part, Sharon tipped over her milk, stepped on Missy's foot, broke a basement window, and stepped hard on two poor, struggling shoots of Mrs. Rogers' most prized delphinium. With each little accident, Sharon seemed truly repugnant and promised tearfully to be more careful. But in 5 or 10 minutes, crash, bang, and something else would be broken. Just before dinner, she whizzed up the back steps to take off her roller skates. Of course, she didn't look behind her and sat down splash in Missy's water dish. Mary Lou Robertson laughed until tears ran down her cheeks. But Sharon was mad. She ripped off her skates, threw them on the porch, and stamped her feet to her room. When Mr. Rogers came home early because of the cheese souffle and found that it wasn't quite ready, he decided to do a little pruning. So, grabbing the pruning shears and with his cutting eye aimed towards anything in the garden showing signs of life, he threw open the back door, strode out into the spring evening, tripped over Sharon's roller skates, took a flying leap off the porch, landed with one foot in the garbage can and the other on the rake, which Sharon had left lying by the steps after retrieving her ball from the porch roof. As he stepped on the tines of the rake, the handle came up and hit him smartly on the nose. Mr. Rogers was so mad he roared, "Marjorie! Sharon! Marjorie! Sharon!" When Sharon timidly opened the back door, he pointed at the roller skate and said, "Did you leave those skates there? Did you leave the rake here?" "Yes," said Sharon in a tiny squeak of a voice. "Well," said her dad, "your careless heedlessness has almost lost my life. I am now going to give you a spanking." And he did, and so dinner was a sniffling, red eyed meal filled with cold looks and long silences, and cheese souffle, which was delicious. Mrs. Rogers was secretly pleased to note that Friday, in spite of Mr. Rogers' spanking, Sharon seemed more heedless than ever. She dropped the waffle iron and tipped over the syrup at breakfast. She banged through the swinging door at her mother, who was carrying a platter of sausages, so that the sausages flew through the air like little zeppelins, and a big blob of grease landed on Sharon's bangs. She turned on the water, and in the kitchen sink so hard it sprayed all over the clean midi blouse and soaked the front of her nice, clean pleated skirt. She banged the front door so hard the house shook, and Mrs. Rogers' new plant fell off the windowsill, and the pot broke into a million pieces, and dirt was scattered all over the hall. The last the Rogers saw of their daughter, she zoomed through the front gate on one roller skate, banged into Mary Lou, who was waiting for her, so that Mary Lou went flouncing off to school alone, took off her roller skate, tossed it over the fence into the bed of crocus, and ran after her friend. Mr. and Mrs. Rogers watched until she rounded the corner. Then they went back to the breakfast table and had another cup of coffee. Mr. Rogers said, "If Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's magic powder doesn't work, I think we should move into an old bomb shelter until Sharon grows out of this awful heedless breaker stage." Mrs. Rogers said, "I still think that dancing lessons might be the answer." Mr. Rogers laughed. "Yeah, I can just see that. Her leaping around, kicking the teacher in the eye, and knocking down other pupils. The only difference would be that she'd be busting things to music. They both laughed. About 4:30 that afternoon, Larry Gary brought Mrs. Rogers a package from Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. Inside the package was a small can, like talcum powder can, with holes on the top. The can was marked Cure for Heedless Breakitis, and the directions read, Sprinkle powder thoroughly over the heedless breaker's bed. Use 2 nights in succession. Mrs. Rogers, who had been waiting for the powder before making Sharon's bed, ran upstairs, threw back the covers, and dusted the entire bottom sheet with the powder. There wasn't much left. She got through, but thought the first day was the most important anyway. That night, Sharon went to bed, having no idea what was in store for her, and slept soundly. But both Mr. and Mrs. Rogers were restless and nervous and dreamed terrible dreams about magic and their poor little girl. When Sharon woke up the next morning, she was very surprised to find that her mother and father standing by her bed, staring at her. "How do you feel?" they said anxiously. "Sleepy," said Sharon, and yawned very slowly. "Hurry and get dressed," said her mother. "I'm going to make French toast." "Goody," said Sharon, and she started to leap out of bed. But instead of leaping, she was very surprised to find herself moving like a queen, slowly and regally. Her body felt very, very heavy, but smooth and sort of floaty. It was pleasant. All right, so what do you think is going to happen next? Make a prediction, and I'll see you next time.